A quiet, summer town. A stretch of green hills leaning against the Ohio River. Ashland, Kentucky looks peaceful from up here. Almost too peaceful. But as we drift over Coalton Woods, remember these trees once swallowed a secret so dark, the town refused to speak its name for 28 years. Today, we're opening that door. Ethan Miller, Jacob Price, Caleb Turner, Ryan McAllister. 4 friends chasing one last adventure before summer break disappeared. They weren't troublemakers. They were just kids who believed the woods behind their street were safe. But on July 14th, 1987, they pedaled past the old coal road, slipped beneath the canopy, and vanished. No sound, no struggle. Just for tire tracks leading into the trees, and absolutely nothing coming back out. Waiting an hour. The search began, but there wasn't a shoe print, a scrap of fabric, or even a broken branch. How do 4 boys vanish in broad daylight? Less than a mile from home. The answer would twist through abandoned mines and local legends. But the real shock didn't come until 2015. Let's open the Coalton Woods case and follow the trail that finally revealed the truth.
The summer of '87 in Ashland, Kentucky felt endless. The kind of heat that made kids believe nothing bad could ever happen. But that illusion cracked the moment for boys Ethan, Jacob, Caleb, and Ryan pushed their bikes down Coalton Road for what they swore would be one last adventure. It looked innocent, almost sweet, yet something in that scene never sat right with the older folks who watched them roll past. Maybe it was the way the woods seemed darker that day. Maybe it was the silence that fell after they disappeared around the bend. No one knew it then, but this simple ride would become the opening chapter of a mystery that would haunt Kentucky for nearly 3 decades. By sundown, the boys should have been home, raiding the fridge, arguing about baseball cards, or begging for one more hour outside. Instead, their empty bikes stood at the edge of Coalton Woods like abandoned trophies. What began as mild worry turned into full-blown panic when no one answered the mothers calling their names across the tree line. Deputies arrived thinking it'd be a simple runaway case, but the woods weren't giving anything back. Not a shout. Not a footprint. Not even the snap of a twig to suggest movement. The sun dropped fast, swallowing the last bit of hope with it. By 10 o'clock, Ashland felt wrong. Doors blocked early. Porch lights stayed on. People whispered about the woods, the way soldiers talk about battlefields. And as officers grid-searched the trails with flashlights slicing through the dark, something became painfully clear. The boys didn't just wander off. They vanished, as if the forest itself decided to keep them. What most towns call a missing persons case, Ashland would come to know as the night its innocents died. The morning after the disappearance, Ashland broke into 2 camps. The ones who believed the boys were hiding somewhere playful and harmless, and the ones who whispered about the old Coalton curse. Every Kentuckian living near the tree line knew the story's strange lights, voices that didn't echo right, and a coal shaft so deep locals swore it touched something darker than rock. Detectives tried to dismiss the folklore, but fear spreads faster than facts, and the town fed on its own imagination. Some blamed drifters, others blamed the woods, and a few pointed fingers at each other. Meanwhile, investigators dug into every lead, interviewing family, classmates, even the quiet neighbor who never smiled. No theory felt solid, and every hour without answers pushed the community deeper into suspicion. The mystery was no longer just about 4 missing boys. It was about everything Ashland thought it knew about itself. Within 24 hours, the search for the boys exploded into the largest operation Ashland had ever seen. Helicopters roared low over Coalton Woods. Valentes marched shoulder to shoulder, sweeping the ground like an army. K-9 units tore through thickets, howling at places that led nowhere. National Guard trucks lined the rural roads, as if preparing for a disaster. Yet the woods stayed silent, almost calculated. At night, floodlights turned the ridges into ghostly walls, but nothing moved. No sound. No clue. No trace of 4 kids who should have left at least a trail of broken branches. The search wasn't just intense, it became legend, the kind told in whispers long after midnight. As the search stretched into days, the investigation twisted in ways no detective liked. Tips poured in from every corner of Kentucky, but each one collapsed the moment officers dug deeper. A fisherman insisted he heard kids shouting near the river, but the banks were clean and quiet. A trucker reported seeing 4 boys hitchhiking, only for police to learn his witness was a reflection in his own side mirror. Even the woods themselves felt like they were playing tricks. Search teams swore they heard footsteps behind them, only to turn and find empty air. Detectives started questioning everyone with even a hint of connection to the boys. Teachers, neighbors, old co-workers, even the mailman who delivered to their street. No one cracked. No one slipped. Every lead, every voice, every clue ended in dead silence. What the detectives didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that they were circling the truth without ever touching it. Coalton Woods didn't just swallow the boys. It swallowed the evidence, leaving investigators chasing shadows that shifted every time they got close. 10 days after the boys disappeared, a volunteer stumbled across something strange. All 4 bikes stacked neatly beside an overgrown trail, untouched by weather or animals. The placement was too perfect, too deliberate, like someone wanted them found. The trail led straight to an abandoned coal shaft sealed decades earlier after a collapse. The mine was infamous in local folklore, but detectives followed the trail anyway, descending into the stale air with industrial lamps and steady nerves. Inside, the walls were scarred with rust and time. Yet one detail stood out, a faint set of marks, carved low into the rock, as if scratched by trembling hands. It wasn't writing. Not yet. But it was enough to prove the boys made it inside. That discovery sent chills through the entire investigation team. If the boys entered the shaft, why didn't they come back out? And who stacked their bikes? Detectives felt the shift immediately. This wasn't a runaway story, and it wasn't an accident. Someone guided them into the mine. Someone who knew the woods better than anyone in Ashland. Someone who wasn't ready to be found. The moment the mine became the focal point, detectives looked hard at anyone connected to the old coal company. One name rose fast: Walter Harlow, a former contractor who lived on the edge of the woods and avoided people the way others avoid storms. He'd been seen near the trail weeks before the disappearance, carrying tools no one could identify. At first, neighbors shrugged him off, as strange but harmless, the kind of man who mumbled to himself at the gas station and disappeared 4 hours into the trees. But when detectives interviewed him, something felt wrong. His answers were precise, almost rehearsed, as if he'd memorized the alibis he needed. He claimed he hadn't seen the boys that day. He claimed he hadn't been near the shaft in years. But his boots told a different story. Mud from a restricted part of Coalton Woods clung to the treads, and a fresh scratch marked the leather. Still, there was no evidence to hold him. No confession, nothing tangible. Walter Harlow walked free, and Ashland felt the unease settle deeper. The truth was close and comfortably close, but just out of reach. 18 months slipped by, draining hope from the investigation like water through cracked stone. Search teams dwindled. Funding dried up. Even the most determined detectives admitted they were running out of ground to cover. Every file, interview, and lead circled back to the same dead end. The shaft in silence. Families begged for the case to stay active, but the department had no more answers to chase. Eventually, the board made its call. The disappearance of Ethan, Jacob, Caleb, and Ryan was officially labeled a cold case. The town felt the announcement like a punch to the chest. Ashland wasn't just grieving for boys. It was grieving the truth it couldn't reach. Time moved on for Ashland, but not for the families. Bedrooms stayed exactly as they were in 1987. Frozen snapshots of childhood waiting to be lived again. Birthday cakes went uncut. School photos stayed in drawers. Every ring of the phone made parents brace for news that never came. Some families clung to faith. Others shut their doors and disappeared into grief. What united them was a single, tormenting question. How do you move forward when the story refuses to end? The boys weren't declared dead, but they weren't alive either. They existed in a painful limbo that kept their families anchored to the same unbearable day. 20-8 years after the boys vanished. A hiker wandering through a restricted section of Coalton Woods slipped through a collapsed ridge and landed beside a narrow ventilation shaft. At first, he thought he'd found nothing more than old mining debris, but then he noticed the carving's 4 lines etched into a stone slab, protected from weather and time. They weren't random marks. They were sentences sought in this pedity, and unmistakably written by children. Detectives raced to the site, reopening a case the town had long believed buried. Those sentences revealed 2 impossible truths. The boys survived longer than anyone imagined, and they weren't alone in that shaft. The discovery tore open a mystery Ashland thought it had learned to live with. Suddenly, every assumption, every theory, every dead lead snapped back to life. The casa wasn't cold anymore. It was burning. When investigators lowered a camera into the newly exposed shaft, the air felt heavier than the mine itself. The carvings matched each boy's handwriting from school records, confirming they'd been alive long after the initial search ended. But the message stopped every detective cold. He told us to wait. That one sentence rewired the entire case. It meant the boys trusted someone. It meant they weren't running. It meant they were guided. A deeper scan revealed a hidden chamber sealed behind a collapsed wall in area the original 1987 teams never reached. Inside, they found remnants of old lantern fuel, scraps of fabric, and a small wooden crate used decades earlier by coal crews. Nothing screamed violence, but everything suggested captivity. Whoever led the boys inside didn't intend to kill them at first. He intended to keep them. And detectives knew exactly who had the access and knowledge to hide them so perfectly. The case roared back to life, with modern tools the 1987 investigators could only dream of. AI enhancement sharpened an old Polaroid taken near the trail on the day the boys vanished. In the corner, almost invisible, stood Walter Harlow's face half-shadowed, holding an object shaped like a lantern. Soil samples from his property matched sediment from the hidden chamber. Even more damning, DNA preserved on a torn jacket found inside the shaft, linked directly to Harlow's workshop. When detectives questioned him again, he tried the same calm routine, the same prepared answers. But this time, he wasn't dealing with tired officers and grainy photos. He was dealing with evidence that spoke louder than he ever could. The fakai cracked. His hands trembled. And for the first time in nearly 3 decades, Walter Harlow realized the woods could no longer protect him. When the arrest was announced, Ashland didn't cheer. It exhaled long, heavy, and full of the grief it had carried for 28 years. Walter Harlow confessed to luring the boys with stories about secret tunnels and hidden treasure, then trapping them inside the shaft after it partially collapsed. A claim had meant to free them, but fear kept him silent as days turned into weeks. The boys died waiting for help that never came. Their remains were found exactly where their final message suggested, close together, as if they refused to let fear separate them. Ashland held a memorial at the edge of Coalton Woods, planting for white markers along the trail where the boys were last seen alive. The town finally knew the truth, but it paid for it with a wound that would never fully close. The woods kept them for decades. Ashland keeps them now. Oh.